I will take questions. You shout them out. I'll repeat them so the microphone can pick them up. And
Yale just accepted some money, I don't remember exactly how much, from Coca-Cola.
Pepsi.
Pepsi. What is the difference to fund some medical school fellowships? And I wonder what you think of that.
Well, the question was Yale just accepted some money from Pepsi to establish a fellowship, I think. And what do I think of that? Well, I think it's really nice if Pepsi wants to do better things. I think it's a public relations nightmare for Yale, but Yale has taken plenty of industry money before and taken it from people as or more badly intentioned as or than Pepsi, bad syntax, sorry. So I guess the question is, what kind of work is this person going to do? If this person does good work, that's great. It's still a difficult public relations situation, but I don't see it as, it's unavoidable. I mean, is it the anti-Rudd-centered fellowship? That's a problem. Are they really giving money to somebody to do good work? We'll see what happens. Sir.
My question is about preparation of food, cooking food. I hear a lot of talk, and I've read a lot of books about what real food is, and how to eat real food, what to eat, but not necessarily how to prepare it. And I've noticed that in poorer communities, people don't know how to actually cook the food, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. Do you think that something, maybe a state-sponsored or a nationally sponsored cooking program, where it's funded, how to teach people, teaching people what to cook, how to cook, would be popular, would be helpful, would be more towards this movement?
Do I have to repeat that question? I've been told to repeat everything, but everybody can hear. But is the mic not going to pick that up? Sound guy?
It probably makes sense to repeat it.
I have to edit you too. You think I'm really good at this? The question is, should we have a national core of cooking schools funded by the government? My answer is yeah, of course. In fact, I will rapidly add it to my list of things that we should do. I think that this is what I've come to think. I've come to think that it's a lot about time. I don't think people can't afford real ingredients. I mean, I'm sure that there are people who can't afford anything. I acknowledge that. But I think if you're taking the bus to work, if you have no spouse or your spouse is taking the bus to work, if you're both working 12 hours a day or 14, and if you're taking the bus to work in Los Angeles, where it could take an hour and a half, and you're leaving the house at 6 in the morning and getting back to the house at 8 o'clock at night, and you're legitimately exhausted and you're not making a lot of money, I think the time really is an issue here. And I think it may be unrealistic, but I don't think it's a bad idea to talk about hiring a national cooking corps. People who will teach you how to cook, but also who will cook for you if you don't have the time or ability to do it yourself. Is that realistic? Maybe not, but it doesn't mean it's not a good idea.
Hi. Any thoughts on the war on salt, particularly in New York?
If you stop there, I can repeat the question. Any thoughts on the war on salt, particularly in New York? I think salt is a bit of a red herring. I think the enemy, perhaps that's a bit strong, I think the problem is processed food. Because if you look at where most people who have problems with salt are getting their salt, it's from processed food. So it goes back to, I don't mean to single out Cheetos, but you're talking about a food that has a huge quantity of salt. People who salt their food, cook their food from scratch and salt it at home, do not tend to use too much salt. So the enemy is not salt, the enemy is letting other people put the salt in your food, because especially as they try to maybe reduce fat and reduce calories, you need something there to make it appealing to people, and that something is salt. So they're going to increase the amount of salt. I think it's a little misguided, and I think it's drawing people's attention away from issues that I believe to be more important. I'm really high on taxing a lot of things at this point. Salt is not among them. So I would tax sugar before I tax salt. I would tax processed food in general before I would tax. I can't imagine getting to the point where a salt tax is going to pass. So they had that in Rome, though, didn't they? How about the gentleman who's so far back I can barely see him? right. Your question is sort of what killed the local farm. Well, there was never a policy against companies buying one another, so there didn't need to be a new policy enabling companies to buy one another. I think the real question is what made mass production of food profitable enough to attract really huge companies and want to gobble up smaller farms. And part of that is obviously technology. And I'm hesitating here because I'm going to miss a couple of points, but let me hit the points that I can remember, or let me hit the points that I don't miss. If you're able to ignore the fact that you're not farming sustainably, which has been the case in the United States for the past 50 or 60 years, if you're able to ignore that and therefore postpone environmental and health costs to a later date, then you can farm in an unsustainable and what most of us would agree is a horrible manner. And it becomes quite profitable to do so. If you're willing to suck all the nutrients out of the soil and replace them with chemicals, if you're willing to have half your topsoil washed down into the Gulf of Mexico with those chemicals and poison the Gulf of Mexico, and if you're willing to poison the workers who are working on this land, all in the name of profits, and you're further willing to let your grandchildren or great-grandchildren bear the costs of this, because we're still not bearing the true costs of this, then mega farming can be quite profitable, and that's how things have stood. There's a second thing, as I'm saying, I'm probably forgetting something, but there's at least a second thing that made industrial farming profitable, and that was the subsidization of commodity crops. So that's been well discussed by many, many people, but basically there is government subsidization of corn, wheat, soy, rice, and 2 or 3 other crops that can make the difference between a crop being profitable and a crop being non-profitable. So we need to end farm subsidies. We need to end those kind of farm subsidies, but I think more importantly, we need to look at what is sustainable farming, what is not going to destroy the earth, perhaps not in our lifetimes, perhaps not in our children's lifetimes, but probably in our grandchildren's lifetimes. And the other talk that I sometimes give is about sustainability and about the fact that industrial food is really responsible to a large extent for global warming, for part of the public health crisis, and for certainly a great deal of the environmental crisis. Right now, we use about 70% of the arable surface of the globe for industrially raised livestock, whether that's directly or indirectly. So about 70% of all farmland in the world is used to directly or indirectly produce industrially raised livestock. The projections are that the amount of meat that gets eaten in the world is going to double by 2050. You can't double the 70% of land that's being used because you get 140 and the land isn't there. So this kind of stuff needs to change. And I'm torn when I give these talks whether to talk about soda and sugar-sweetened beverage and junk food, because in a way it's a smaller part of the picture, but in a very real way it's a part of the picture where actual progress is being made. I don't see that actual progress is being made in reducing the amount of industrially raised livestock that Americans are consuming. If I did, I might be focusing more on that. I think it's super important, but I like to see progress now and then. And in the soda world, there really is progress. And I think we're going to see, I think everyone is going to see it this year in 2010.
So what would be in it for these big companies and their
This is the million-dollar, excuse me for interrupting you. How can the big food companies make money marketing stuff that's not junk? Is that your question? I'm sorry.
It is, but how do you, I mean, I know that's, but I mean, do you get their stockholders in there? How do you?
I don't think change has come in this country. I don't think change has come in this country from stockholders doing the right thing. I could be wrong, but I don't see it. Look, these companies' job is to make money for their stockholders. So if they're making money for their stockholders are happy. If you don't like Philip Morris, you sell the stock. You don't try to change Philip Morris as a stockholder anyway. I can't answer the question. It's a question I've been asking every day. As soon as I have the answer, believe me. But here's the thing. Electric cars were possible 100 years ago, but electric cars were not profitable 100 years ago. Electric cars are going to be profitable now. Why are they profitable now? Because gas guzzlers are becoming less profitable. So there's this kind of thing going on here. Is there a way to make it so that carrot cakes are less profitable than carrots? The only thing I can think of is you tax the hell out of carrot cake. Carrot cakes may be a bad example, but you know what I'm talking about. And taxes are unpopular. And it's, it's kind of hard to stand up here and say tax, 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 because clearly the majority of American people are not that fond of taxes. But this is about social engineering. And I don't know a better way to do it. I can't envision a better way to do it. And as soon as someone clues me in, I'll be happy to spread the word. But no one has. And way smarter people are spending way more time than me thinking about this. So that's the best answer I can give you. Is this side of the room challenged? Yes, ma'am. The observation is that inner cities don't have supermarkets and inner city markets don't have good food. And that perhaps Philadelphia would be better off giving incentives to supermarkets to open in inner cities instead of taxing soda. That's a fair summary, don't you think? And it's interesting that you say that because Pennsylvania is leading the country in subsidizing supermarkets and opening in inner cities. And the Pennsylvania model, am I getting this right? The Pennsylvania model is being mimicked all over the country. I think even in Connecticut. I think there's some action here on this, no? But there is action around the country on what Pennsylvania did, which was set aside a bunch of money to say to supermarkets, if you're willing to open in inner cities, we are going to subsidize you. I mean, this was a part of my talk. I'll say it again. I think it's important to make sure that there's decent food available to everybody, whether that means subsidizing supermarkets to go into neighborhoods or directly making certain that people are provided with good food, or subsidizing farmers markets, as some states have done, making your food stamps worth more at a farmer's market than it is elsewhere. All of these things, I'm completely in support of all of these efforts.
So far, all of the solutions that we've discussed are all policy-related solutions, and since a lot of us here are students thinking about our careers in the future, what can we go into? What can we do with the market-driven economy? What can we do otherwise besides,
Become politicians.
becoming politicians to sort of help, change the control that big food has and change the balance?
Well, so the question is, what fields should young people think of going into in order to work towards these admirable goals? I mean, I would say first, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but I would say first that learning how to cook is really important. Because we all have to have our own personal food policy, and your own personal food policy begins with cooking. And if you don't have time to cook, I think you need to examine where your time is going. If you legitimately don't have time to cook after that, I don't know what to tell you, but most people can make time to cook at least some of the time. So that's number one. Where should you go? Is this a public health issue? Should you be doing what, there's a high-ranking executive at Pepsi now who came from the World Health Organization who evidently thinks he's burrowing from within. I find it hard to believe, but he seems well-intentioned. I'm going to have to think about that one. I don't really have a great answer to that question. I'm sorry. Ma'am?
Speaking of cooking, what is the proportion of beans to rice, if there is one? And also, is there a particular kind of bean that is better than any of the others?
I think that, I like this question. Some of you obviously think it's amusing. The question is there a proportion of beans to rice that's correct, and is there a kind of bean that's better than others? I would say if you're eating beans and rice, you're doing great. That's really my answer. I think the proportion of beans to rice is whatever you want it to be. I think the kind of bean is the kind that's going to get you to eat more of them. I think that the whole complete protein thing about you have to have brown rice with beans and you have to eat them at the same time is a notion that's been pretty much disproven. I don't think that protein is particularly an issue in the United States for 95% of our population, perhaps 99% of our population. Most of us get too much of it. So I would say eat the beans and rice the way you like them, and that's really my considered answer. Now, sir. Yes. What are my thoughts on organic food and do I cook with it or them? I have no, well, I guess it's not real. I can't say this. I was going to say I have no problem with organic food. My problem with organic food, well, let's look at what organic food does well. Organic food presumably protects the earth, protects workers who are not exposed to herbicides and pesticides, maybe of slightly higher nutritional value than non-organic food, and is more in accordance with nature, shall we say. But what's the problem with organic food? I'm just trying to see if I have any organic food here. Is kashi organic? No, yes or no? No, it's all natural. Okay, here's the problem with organic food. There's a lot of you can have organic food that's bad. So I don't want to choose, we just had this discussion this morning. I have this discussion a lot. I've been waiting for you, actually. I don't want to choose between, as I did this morning, Quaker granola and what? Thank you. Cascadian Farms granola, when I look at the nutritional profile, and they're both the same. Although, in fact, to be perfectly fair, I believe that Quaker had less sugar, but Cascadian Farms had a little more fiber. So they were roughly equivalent, and neither of them tasted any good, by the way. So I don't want to stand here and say unequivocally organic food is good, because it's not. So the organic food has potential, and some organic food is good. But if you're choosing between an organic hamburger and a not organic apple, the apple is almost always going to be the better choice. And so I wind up sounding like a scoundrel who's against organic food, which I'm not, but I don't think it's the most important thing. I wouldn't go so far as to saying it's a red herring, like I think salt is a red herring. But I think the reason that organic food has become so popular, and this goes back to this question, is that the food marketers saw an opportunity for tremendous profits in a very specialized upscale market. And they seized it, and they did not say the spirit of organic food, as we know, is whole foods. The spirit is rebuilding the earth. The spirit is providing people with great nutrition. They said, here's an opportunity to make money by growing organic food. So they set up grape farms in Chile that didn't use pesticides and herbicides, which is very nice, but you're still flying bad grapes from Chile up to here, and now you're calling them organic. Grapes is not the best example because, in a way, there's nothing wrong with grapes. But Cascadian Farms granola is a really good example because it's crap. I haven't had this many questions in a long time. Sir, we're
Yeah, you talk in your talk about making Madison Avenue not the problem but the solution. I was wondering, because you didn't really give any explanations of how that would occur.
As I said before, I don't know how it's going to occur. It's I could do things if I could mandate them, but I can't mandate anything. So I guess I see my role as to throw ideas out there and hope other people like them. And if they do, maybe we make enough noise so things begin to change or things change more rapidly. It's the best I can do. I'm actually completely powerless. Sir, this is affirmative action for men because there are so few of you in the audience.
What do you think about hunter-gatherer sort of Paleolithic diet that goes further on a sort of diet level than sort of conventional understanding of real food and eliminates grains and rice and corn?
You know, I love this argument. This is the argument that we were all happier and better off when we were hunter-gatherers, and I really love this argument. But it's a game. It's not going anywhere. We are not going back to being hunters and gatherers, and we can't with 6 or 7, whatever it is, billion people on the planet. So I've read that stuff, and Jared Diamond wrote about that, I think, 20 years ago. It's been around for a while. And I think it's a lot of fun, but I can't do it, and I don't know too many people who can. So the question is, what can be done to bring good foods into bodegas, and is it worth trying? You have the answer to the is it worth trying, because you're doing that work. Do I think it's a great idea? I think it's an awesome idea. Do I think it will have an impact? Yeah, I think clearly it will have an impact. It's small, but I think every step we're going to take is small. So there's your answer as to what to do when you get out of school. Yes.
As a future public or charter school teacher, what do you recommend being in a school where 80% of the kids are on free or reduced price lunch and being served hamburgers and french fries every day, and yet you have on the wall a nutritional poster?
Yeah, it is kind of ironic, isn't it? Yeah.
The plate, they have like this much space in the back to do exercise. So what do you recommend as a teacher to encourage your kids to?
So what do I recommend as a teacher to help your kids eat better? I think you can point out that irony, but I also think that this year is a key year because it's a year in which school lunch programs can actually change. And I ordinarily don't say write your congressman, but this year I think writing your congressman, I mean, you don't have to write your congressman, obviously. You can call, you could use your congressman's Facebook page or Twitter or whatever, but and they, congressmen tweet incredibly. Well, I don't know why I should find that incredible, but this is a year we can actually make some progress in school lunches, and maybe you won't have to be embarrassed when you're up there. I spoke to the Western Division of something called something like the National Conference of Food Service Dining Hall Managers. Anyway, a group of people who run college dining halls. And this was the Western, everything west of Denver kind of group. And they had the same problems, but they did say that kids were making more demands. And there's an interesting, Yale, of course, was early on in this, but there's an interesting phenomenon of people going into colleges and saying, we want better food than this. And there has been some activity in college dining halls to make things better. And I wonder if we can see things becoming better in I think it's 80% of college dining halls that are run industrially, that is Sodexo, Marriott, and companies like that actually provide the services to the dining halls. So now you have companies that really are involved in, that really are big food, being made demands on to serve better food to their clients. So I'm curious to see what will happen with that. That's another sort of rapidly developing thing. I'm going to take 3 more questions because my voice is going. Ma'am? Education is clearly important, but I think making crap, to use a technical term, more expensive and good food less expensive is in part an answer. Also, making things available. I mean, we don't know what people will buy if you put it in front of them, but it is clear. There was an interesting study, a sort of amusing and discouraging study a couple of weeks ago, that showed that if you tax bad food, people will eat less of it. But if you subsidize good food, people will use the savings that you get this, right? You can see where this is going. People will use the savings from that to buy junk food. So I think that you need to have both things happen at the same time. You have to disincentivize, as I said before, you have to demonize bad food the way we demonized cigarettes. And then at the same time, you have to make good food more widely available, more appealing, which you can do by teaching cooking, by education, obviously, and less expensive. 2 more.
You spoke about at Food Network just briefly in your presentation, but I was wondering what role you see in media outlets like Food Network or the internet in promoting people to cook for themselves and go into the kitchen. And I mean, I'm a big fan of your columns in the New York Times and your videos, and I'd like to definitely see more of that.
Thank you. The question is, what do I see as the role of the Food Network and the internet in helping people learn how to cook. I think the Food Network and the internet are really, really different things. Well, nothing brilliant there, but I don't think the Food Network has been super productive and super helpful in teaching people to learn how to cook. I don't think that's their role. I don't think they want that to be their role. Julia Child, Graham Kerr, the people who I watched on television when I was 14 or whatever it was, they actually tried to teach you how to cook. You don't see a lot of that on television. The web is really different because, as we all know, the web is really democratic. So, you know, my stuff, which is done through the auspices of the Times, which has an actual budget, which is done by professionals and has a front man of someone who's reasonably well known and so on, is a good example of how a big company and a sort of name brand guy can do something halfway decent online, I think. But there are people doing stuff online that's really, really great that they're doing for free, or, you know, they're doing with their own money. And I think there's a lot. I started looking at things because I'm relaunching my website and I want to link to people I like, so I started to look at other people's videos, and there's a ton of great stuff out there that really is directly teaching people how to cook, not to mention that you can find anything you're looking for. So if you decide you want to make, you know, Indonesian food tonight, you can go make Indonesian food tonight. You can find that stuff, which is really quite incredible. So, okay, who's last? Yes, look at that. You're the only hand up. It's perfect.
You said something before about having your own food policy, and so I have a very strong food policy. My most recent addition is like getting meat that's humanely raised and hormone-free and all that stuff. And the best place I found is Whole Foods to get that meat that I can like trust. But I recently read in your blog, I think, that you're not a fan of Whole Foods Market, and I wanted to know why.
I'd rather talk about the personal food policy thing. I mean, I find Whole Foods, I'll talk about both. The question is, why am I not a fan about Whole Foods? But also, let's just wrap up with a little personal food policy stuff. I think Whole Foods is a little cynical, more than a little cynical. And when I walk into one, and all the ones in Manhattan, or most of the ones in Manhattan, are 2 levels, and you walk in and the top level is all prepared food, and if you want an apple or a quart of milk, you have to go downstairs. So it's kind of this classic supermarket trick of getting you to walk through the high profit stuff in order to get to the real stuff. I also don't like that when they sell conventional food, which they sell a lot of, it's 2 or 3 times as expensive as it is everywhere else. Okay, that aside, I will credit them for having the most progressive seafood policy of any supermarket in the United States, of any supermarket chain in the United States. So it's not a black and white situation. I tend to sometimes overreact to things, but I just want, here's my personal food policy, and this is all summed up in Food Matters, which is the book that my most recent book, which came out last year. I try to eat sustainable meat, try to eat sustainable fish, although there's very little of it left. But the biggest effort I make is to eating less of that stuff than I did. In other words, if I were eating, the average American eats half a pound of meat a day, and more if you count dairy, but half a pound of meat a day, which is about 7 times as much as most people should be eating. That is, we should be eating half a pound of meat a week. If you were to go and say, I've changed my diet, I'm now eating sustainable foods, but I haven't changed anything else about it, again, I don't think you're doing anybody any favors. I think the key is to say, I'm going to eat less meat, and I'm going to take that money, and the meat that I do eat, I'm going to eat sustainable, naturally raised, whatever you like, organic, local, I'm going to eat that. But I'm going to eat a quarter of what I used to eat. And I think that's I'm advocating this. I think this is an important thing. I think the real key is the little seesaw. And I think the seesaw looks like this. My favorite slide in this whole presentation is the pepperoni pizza with the little slice of spinach. We eat that way. We eat 90% of our calories come from junk, processed foods, and animal products, and 10% of our calories, or maybe less, come from unprocessed fruits and vegetables. We need to make the seesaw look like this. So we need to make it look like that other cute pizza with the whole big plate of spinach and the Cheetos wedge in there. We need to be eating unprocessed foods primarily and unprocessed plants primarily. So fruits, vegetables, legumes, whatever kind you want, whole grains, and nuts and seeds. Those are the things we need to focus on. And to the extent we can make our seesaw look like this instead of like this, we're doing really well. And to the extent, for those of you who think that this is insane, which I agree, it's extremely challenging, I personally believe that if most people in this country went like this, it would be a sea change. It would be a revolution. To see people getting 20 or 30% of their calories from unprocessed fruits and vegetables in this country would be an enormous change. And that's the thing anyone can do. That's the thing anyone can afford, as the gentleman in the back said before. That's the thing, that's the word that needs to spread, and that's, you know, I think we need to attack this issue both ways. From the bottom up, which is to change our own eating habits and to change the eating habits of our family and our friends and blah, blah, blah. And then by doing our own lobbying, by doing our own advocacy work, by trying to get a soda tax passed, for example, by trying to get good foods into supermarkets, by trying to get supermarkets into all neighborhoods, and by, you know, attacking this thing from every conceivable angle. You know, maybe there's hope for, what, my grandchildren? I don't know. It's too late for me. I could eat any old way. It wouldn't matter anymore. So, thank you. And again, I'd like to thank the Rudd Center for sponsoring this.